Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. I know you've got limited time, so thanks for spending some of it with me. Whether you're a brand new yoga teacher, currently in training, or you've been teaching for years, this podcast is for you. My goal is to help you feel like teaching can be easy, fun, and a natural extension of who you are, rather than something you have to do the right way, whatever that is, or something that feels like you have to work hard at it all the time. This isn't a podcast where I'll be telling you what to do or critiquing your teaching. Instead, I'll share frameworks, skills, and techniques you can experiment with to see what works for you, especially when it comes to understanding anatomy, cueing, and sequencing. I'll share ideas that may challenge what you believe about what it takes to be a yoga teacher. All I ask is that you keep an open mind, because some of what I share may sound different from what you've heard. We'll also talk about the mindset of a confident teacher, not only because it's such a big part of empowered teaching, but because it's rarely discussed. With that, welcome, and let's get into today's conversation. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 402. I'm recording this on April 30th, 2026, and this will go live on May 4th, 2026. So we're heading through 2026 with, I don't want to say a breakneck speed, at reasonable speed, I suppose, but when the month ends and a new one begins, you always sort of get, at least I do, that sort of feeling of, how are things going generally with teaching, with my business, with supporting teachers in my programs. Like I just naturally, as the calendar flips to a new month, just take stock of where I'm at. And I'm wondering for you, what comes up for you as we head into May? What are some things that are coming up for you, things you're working on in your classes or as a teacher from a development standpoint? What are some things that maybe you wish you could change, or maybe you have on your mind to quote unquote work on? I mean, we're ever evolving as humans. And certainly when we look at ourselves as teachers, we're ever evolving as well. So, what comes up for you when you think about the answer to that question? I wanted to start out by giving you a recap of the past weekend when I had a chance to fly into Cleveland and teach an anatomy intensive to the teachers in Cleveland Yoga's 300-hour teacher training. And if you were checking out my Instagram stories, I didn't post any of this stuff on my TikTok, but if you were checking out my Instagram stories, you might have seen some of the posts I did on a daily basis from Cleveland. I flew in on Thursday, April 23rd. So I had a full day with Tammy Schneider, who used to own Cleveland Yoga. It's now owned by a separate company, and she still teaches the teacher trainings there. And she is a longtime friend of mine. She and I went to our first teacher training with our original teacher, Baron Baptiste, in 2002. So I've known her since then. And we've always sort of kept in touch, even though when she attended the training, she, of course, owned a studio in Cleveland. When I attended the training, I wasn't teaching yet. And I, of course, lived in Boston, where I continue to live. And we kept in touch over the years when we both were teaching for Baron Baptiste. We attended other trainings. And it really was within the past, I don't know, a little bit less than a year that she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love to have you join us in Cleveland to teach an anatomy intensive over a weekend. Let's talk about it." And I was thrilled for the invite and thrilled to go. And it sort of was the thing where I'd been thinking about it and planning for it since October of last year. And when it was getting closer and closer to going, I couldn't believe it was here. I was just having feelings like on Christmas Eve, that feeling of just super excited, anticipation, and just curiosity. Like, I wonder how it's going to go. I've taught this content before. However, I haven't had an opportunity of late to teach it in person as part of a 300-hour teacher training. And so I really wanted it to kind of seamlessly fit in to the work they were already doing. And I wanted it to really be true to my teaching method, even though, as I admitted to them on that very first day, I felt nervous. And I admitted that intentionally because I wanted them to see that I could feel nervous. Some of them, have some awareness of my background and that I've been teaching for many, many years, over 20 years. And they might have this perception, oh, well, she's got it all handled. She doesn't get nervous anymore. And on the very first day of training, I admitted to feeling nervous, but it was nervous, excited, not nervous, worried. But it's still nerves. And part of our job as a yoga teacher is to develop mindset techniques that help us manage feeling nervous. And that actually came up in conversation as we had our first session. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what we did, just a really brief thing, because to be honest, the entire agenda, which really was a Friday night and then all day Saturday, all day Sunday, I'm thinking of packaging into a separate standalone in-person training that I would do here in Boston to give you an opportunity to come to Boston and experience this. Because now that I've conducted this sort of training in person and seen the shifts that the teachers made, I know I absolutely want to do it again. And I can do it as a standalone training. You'll still get continuing education credits for it, which you can use towards your Yoga Alliance CEU registration or CEU requirement. But more importantly than that, I mean, that's just paperwork. More importantly than that, it's being able to experience this. Because my observation of these teachers over the 3 days I was there was just profound. I mean, I saw them really shift from having the first night when we got together from 6 to 9, and I had a number of discussion topics. I heard some of their concerns and fears and worries about learning anatomy, about teaching, some of the concerns they had in their classes. Some of the responses they shared with me brought up some of the beliefs about teaching yoga that many times are sort of part and parcel with being in the yoga industry and don't oftentimes come to teachers' minds as something that they get to decide whether or not they want to believe this, because there are a lot of teachers out there that will very forcefully push a particular narrative. And especially to a newer teacher, they might feel like, well, this is just the way it is. And I love to have those kinds of conversations because in my mind, that's complete baloney. It's all about giving the teacher an empowered approach to teaching where they have the control, where they have the power, where they can set their own intentions, where they can decide how they want to teach. It's never about somebody else saying this is how it has to be done. Because the reality is there's no right way to teach. There's your way to teach. And so we had a lot of conversation about that sort of thing on Friday. And when we got together on Saturday morning for our full day of training, one of the first things I did was I just did a check-in with them. How are you doing? How are you doing since what we talked about last night? And so many people said, I'm feeling so much relief now. I'm so glad we had that sort of precursor conversation and time together before we head into today's session where we're really going to be building the knowledge. You've helped relieve so much of the pressure. The conversation really took the pressure off. So now I'm coming into today's session feeling energized and curious and open. And I heard that sort of thing, especially the open piece, feeling open and interested in learning, even from teachers who had a lot of experience, who were there more in a supervisory role and not there as teachers in the actual training. And that just is a testament to the quality of people that were there, that even teachers with experience that are, into their own way of teaching, they were also willing to show up and do the work and stay open and ask questions and were curious about learning. And I think the thing that made the biggest impact on me, I didn't really personally have a lot of time to take pictures. And so I was really depending on other people to snap a couple of shots that I could use on my social media. And at the end, though, we did take a group picture. Somebody else that wasn't in the training took the group picture for us. And shortly after this person took the picture, and I got my copy texted to me from one of the people in the training, the first thing I noticed when I looked at their faces was how transformed they looked, how happy they looked, the smiles of every single person. There were about 25 people in the training. The smiles on every single person's face looked so happy, so calm, so present, so genuine. You know, like when you take group pictures and like some people look goofy and other people look like they weren't ready for the shot and other people are like with a forced smile. Nobody had that. Every single person in their picture, in the picture, looked like they had shifted. They had shifted at a deep and profound level. And, I invite you, go to my Instagram page because I have a little reel video, which is a kind of a consolidation of a number of different shots. And at the end of that video is the group shot. And see for yourself. I think it's pretty clear. Everybody just looks natural and relaxed. And to me, that was like the most impactful thing is just to see from that first night to that absolutely like literally the end of the training, just the look on their faces and how they shifted. Now, one of the things I did at the tactical level was I had a big sheet of whiteboard paper hanging on the wall called Quick Wins. And I wanted people, as they were inspired in the conversation we were having, as they were inspired in the training sessions as they happened on Saturday and Sunday, I wanted them to write on the board, what are some things that you're learning in this training that you're interested in trying straight away in your classes? These are quick wins. Like the opposite of that feeling of I went to a training for an entire weekend and I came out the other side feeling completely overwhelmed and not knowing how to apply anything to my teaching. That's absolutely not what this was. And in fact, before we took that group shot and we went around and everybody in the circle got to share just a little bit about how they felt about the training or just how they were feeling. I just did a check-in. There were a number of people that said, I really liked that a lot of what we did was applied anatomy. And that just, I was so happy to hear that because that is such a big part of my teaching method, that it's not just about building the knowledge, it's about how are you actually going to use it. Again, because you're not going to spend money and time in a training that's just about overwhelming you with information. And you want to come out of that training with actual real stuff you can use in your classes. So I was really, really thrilled that a lot of people brought that up because that was absolutely my intention. And I think kind of the takeaway for me is, if I look at the training from a 10,000 foot view, is this motto that I recently coined where I say, understanding movement changes everything. Understanding movement changes everything because it does. It changes how you feel when you're teaching. It changes how you can help your students. It changes the kinds of modifications you offer. It changes the kind of cues you use. It changes the way you build your sequences. It changes how you assist people. It changes how you answer questions. It changes how you feel when you're driving home from your classes. It changes how you talk about what you do when somebody meets you in line at Starbucks and they say, "Oh my God, you're a yoga teacher." Or it changes how you talk about it when you talk to people that you meet at a dinner party. Understanding movement changes everything. And too many teachers put it to the side. Oh, I can't learn anatomy. Oh, I didn't learn it. So, my time is over for trying to do that. Or, I don't really want to focus on anatomy when I'm teaching, which again is such a misunderstanding and such a misplaced belief. You must understand movement to teach your classes because understanding movement is understanding anatomy and you're teaching movement. So the takeaway for me was really seeing in the teachers in this training this motto come to life. Understanding movement changed everything for them in all the different ways that I shared about the anatomy. I used my 10-step blueprint. People loved that I kept coming back to the steps in the 10-step blueprint. We weren't just having conversations about anatomy. I wasn't just showing them slides. I wasn't overloading them with information. I shared on day one, here's the 10-step blueprint, and we went through the steps. Every step has a lesson, and we just followed the steps. Just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, follow the yellow brick road. She just followed the yellow brick road to get to the Emerald City. That's all she had to do. She had to just stay on the path. And that's exactly what learning anatomy with my 10-step blueprint is like. Now, of course, this is the basis of my Yoga Anatomy Accelerator program, which is an online program. It's also the basis for learning anatomy in my one-on-one program, the Blueprint program. And both of those programs are global programs that I do online. So if you're listening to this and you're like, damn, I wish I could have been at that training, guess what? You can still benefit from this learning process by enrolling in one of my online programs. And you can find links to those in the show notes as well as on my website, barebonesyoga.com. So with that, I wanted to shift, now that I gave you that update, which I wanted to, giving you that update on how the anatomy intensive went. I want to now shift the conversation to just a small piece of a particular lesson I taught in the training. And especially if you're listening and you were at that training, this will just give you a little bit of kind of a follow-up lesson that you can play around with. But you don't need to have been at the training in Cleveland to benefit from this. So I want to share with you one of the central principles that I teach around sharing anatomy in your cues is to use a framework. And the framework is, if you want to share anatomy in your cues, to keep it simple so people can understand it, and to keep it simple so you can easily and confidently share it, just give them 3 anatomy cues to get them in the pose, and then give them 3 action cues to get them in the pose, and then give them 1 anatomy cue that speaks to one of the muscles at work in the posture. So more specifically, give them 1 anatomy cue that speaks to one of the muscles concentrically contracting in the pose. Now, this particular technique comes up in the 10-step blueprint after you've gone through step 1 through 7, because step 8 is how to apply anatomy to your cues. So I'm sharing this with you before you've gone through step 1 through 8. So you're not ready to do this until you go through step 1 through 8, which you can either do with me in my online program or maybe come to Boston when I do this in person. But I want to share it with you so you can get a sense of how this all works. So let's say you're teaching bridge pose. So you're just going to give them some, and I'm saying 3, but this is not restrictive. You can say whatever you want. You can give them as many action cues as you want to get them in the pose. The point is, get them in the pose first before you share the anatomy. And the best way to do that, in my mind, is to give them just straight up action cues. So they're laying on their back. You're going to get them into bridge. Set your feet at hip width distance apart. Place your arms by your sides. Lift your hips. Interlace your fingers underneath. Done. So now you can speak to one of the muscles concentrically contracting in the pose. So I know a lot of times when I talk about this, I talk about the gluteus maximus and its role in hip extension. But today I'm going to talk about the rhomboids and the middle traps and their role in adduction of the scapula, which is bringing the scapula closer to the spine. So you've given them the action cues. So now you could say something like, I want you to squeeze your shoulder blades together. Do you feel the contraction of the muscle in the middle of your back? Those are your rhomboids and your middle traps. That's it. So you're giving them the action you're speaking to. It's the action that the muscle's doing, and then you're giving them the muscle name. Right? So now they're in the pose, hearing the cue, hearing the muscle name, and connecting the two. I mean, how cool is that? Now they're walking away from class like, oh man, rhomboids, great. Bring the scapula closer together. Okay, so that's one example. Let's shift to speaking to the gluteus maximus. So in bridge, the glute max is responsible for hip extension. So again, I'm sort of fast forwarding. You have to go through step 1 through 7, like I said before, but hip extension as people lift the hips. The gluteus maximus, not the glutes, the gluteus maximus is on the posterior pelvis. And so you get them in the pose with whatever action cues you give them. And then you could say, as you lift your hips, squeeze around your sitting bones. Do you notice your gluteus maximus contracting? Do you feel the muscle on the back of your pelvis contracting? That's your glute max. So again, I never teach from the point of view of say exactly what I'm saying. I always teach from the point of view of let me share a framework with you. And then once you've learned the anatomy, go ahead and say it however you want, because now you're speaking from what you know. And another one of my sayings is when you speak from what you know, your confidence grows. When you speak from what you know, your confidence grows. So another one might be you have people just standing on the ground and, standing up, and you want to get them into tree pose. So you're going to give them some action cues. Lean into your left leg, pull your right foot up to your inner left thigh. Reach your arms up to the sky. Okay, so gave them action cues, they're in the pose. So now, what's one of the muscles concentrically contracting in tree? Well, how about the standing leg, the quadriceps, which is responsible for knee extension? So I'm going to give you a second. Think about how are you going to speak to that? How are you going to share anatomy in your cue that refers to the concentric action of the quads of the standing leg? Just whatever comes to your mind. So one thing you could say is root into your standing leg and squeeze the muscle of your standing thigh. Those are your quads. Root into your standing leg. Do you feel your quadriceps engage? Okay, you kind of getting the hang of it. All right, let's do another one for tree pose. There's a big muscle around the center of your body. It's called the transversus abdominis, right? Too many yoga teachers just talk about the core. It's not good, bad, or otherwise, but wouldn't you rather be able to tell your students, like, here's the actual core muscle you're using here. So around the center of your body, the transverse abdominis is. It's kind of like a corset, and it provides stability and integrity to the center, on the front and the back. So it's really good to protect, I don't want to say to protect, to really support the low back as well. And so in tree pose, because they're standing on one leg, they need some core support so that they don't fall out of the pose. So the action of the transversus abdominis is to cinch the sides of the waist in. So now I want you to think about, now that you know the action of the transversus abdominis, what's an anatomy-based cue that you would share after you got them in the pose? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, so you could say something like, hug the sides of the waist in, hug in towards the center line, hug the sides of the body in. That's your transversus abdominis that creates stability in this pose. Do you feel that? Or just say it. Do you notice the transversus abdominis contract? Now, maybe you don't say the actual muscle name, but you can say the action of the muscle, right? So this is not about saying what I'm saying. It's more about here's a framework you can use to share your cues. So I wanted to just sort of tease that a little bit as one of the things that you'll learn if you work with me inside one of my programs. And also for anybody listening who was at the teacher training, you can play with this format by doing the exercise that I just did to kind of take yourself through an exercise to refine how you can share anatomy in your cues. Now, I just want to say one quick thing before I move to the next topic. In the middle of talking about that particular cue, my computer, Zoom, completely died, which is really weird. So if the recording sounds a little choppy, it's because I actually had to back out and then start up a part 2. So I just wanted to share that. I'm going to have to do a little merging on the back end. Okay, so now we talked about the cueing part. So I want to go to another part, really the main part of this episode. And it's about this mindset technique that I call zooming out. Now, I didn't coin that. I mean, it's just kind of a conversational thing, but I bet I'm one of the only people that uses it in the context of teaching yoga as it relates to refining your mindset, building a strong and confident mindset. So let me tell you what this is about in a few minutes here. So I want you to think about the two frames of reference, zooming in and zooming out. So let's start with zooming in. So let's say you're the kind of yoga teacher who finds that you get nervous when you're teaching your classes. And as you get nervous, you get this kind of aura and things start to get out of control. You get hot and sweaty, you lose your place in the sequence, and pretty soon you're freaking out. Now, this is all relative. It can kind of show up in a bunch of different ways. But if this happens to you, I'm going to give you a nervous system down regulation exercise you can do, like a nervous system calming exercise you can do. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the zooming in part of this. So part one is we need to down regulate the nervous system. We need to turn on the parasympathetic side, which is the calming side, and we need to tone down the sympathetic side, which is the fight or flight side. So as you're teaching, you start to feel this aura coming on. You're going to get nervous, or you're already in that feeling nervous. I want you to just put them in a pose, preferably something like down dog where they're not looking at you, and then just count them through 5 long breaths. And you take the breaths with them to activate the parasympathetic side of your nervous system. As you're doing this, it's really important that you also bring your attention to your feet, stand at hip width distance apart, spread through your toes. That'll stretch the plantar fascia at the bottom of your feet and start to just activate some of the sensory neurons and sensation in the bottoms of your feet. I can't think of the term right now. The sensory receptors in the bottom of your feet, which will start to send messages to your brain, start to kind of calm. Sort of that stretching of the plantar fascia will add to just your own somatic experience. And then also draw up through the crown of your head. This will turn on the anatomical action of axial extension, which is lifting up through the crown of the head to create length in the spine. Now, that in about 5 seconds should do it. It should sort of short circuit that nervous feeling and start to get you a little more down regulated so you can now start to focus. So part two of this, now you don't have to do part two of this if you feel like that tripping the system in a good way worked. But if it didn't exactly work, I want you to zoom in. Zoom in on one of the people in your class. And for the next few minutes, just teach to them. Just teach to them as if it were private. And this zooming in, which essentially takes now the shift, it essentially takes the focus from you and how you're feeling to them and how your words are landing on them. So this is how, when I say one of my other sayings, say the cue and see what they do. This is now you putting that into practice. You're literally saying your cue, just watching them and seeing what they do. Saying another cue, seeing what they do, just watching this one person. And in this exercise of over the next few minutes, just teaching to this one person, it starts to shift your somatic sensation, or let me say, it starts to shift your focus from the internal, kind of ruminating on, oh, I'm feeling really nervous, to the external. How is my teaching landing on the student? And then over the next few minutes, you should start to shift back into your normal pattern, or maybe even an upgraded pattern of feeling more confident. So that's the zooming in part. So now let's talk about the zooming out part. And this is really kind of an overall strategy to help you feel a little more confident and a little more positive about how things are going for you as a teacher. And this especially relates to you if you're feeling a little discouraged, you're feeling like this isn't really working out the way I wanted it to, or I don't feel like I'm qualified, or I'm comparing myself to everybody else and I never feel like I'm up to speed with other teachers. The zooming out technique encourages you to zoom out and look at things from the 10,000 foot view. So rather than focusing on these really detailed things from a zoom in perspective, now I'm using zoom in a little differently than in the example before. I want you to step back and acknowledge yourself for teaching the class. Acknowledge yourself for teaching your classes, however, wherever and however many classes you're doing on a weekly basis. I want you to acknowledge yourself for stepping into the room and leading people through a yoga practice, because you're still doing an enormous amount just by doing that, even if in your mind you don't feel so hot about how you're doing right now. When you start to zoom out, you acknowledge yourself for the work that you're doing, even though, sure, you may want to improve, even though, absolutely, there may be some things that you want to learn, even though at a high level, you want to feel more confident. All of that can still be true. But the reality is shifting your perspective to this zoomed out, kind of like the difference between selfie mode and landscape mode, or when you go for a walk in nature and you see everything around you, you're taking it all in, which from a neuroscience standpoint will naturally decrease the impact of your sympathetic nervous system. Andrew Huberman has talked about this at length on his podcast. So this zooming out allows you to take a deep breath, kind of take it all in a good way. So I want you to use this zooming out technique, especially if you're feeling a little discouraged or feeling off track. And remember, you're still checking the box. I talked about this a lot over the weekend in Cleveland. You're still checking the box. You're still doing amazing work, even though in your mind you have places to go, things you want to learn, upgrades you want to implement into your teaching, new layers you want to add. You're still checking the box. And I don't mean checking the box in sort of a whatever sort of way. I mean, really, really checking the box, teaching the yoga, adding benefit, giving people an opportunity to move their body. This is important work. Okay, so I hope those two techniques, zooming in and zooming out, are helpful to you. And I encourage you over the next couple of weeks and months to play around with these mindset techniques. This is a way that you can shift your focus to one of less empowered to more empowered. All right, so the final thing I want to talk about in this episode is I want to give you a little exercise to do, especially if you're feeling discouraged and feeling like you're not worthy, feeling like you're not qualified enough, feeling like you don't know enough. This can also be really helpful to a new teacher who might feel like, oh, I'm really nervous and I'm feeling like I'm not ready. But it also can speak to a teacher who's been teaching for a while and who struggles with having a confident mindset. And so what this asks of you is that you first sit and do like 2 or 3 minutes of grounding, meditation to kind of ground your body. And then sort of like a mantra-based meditation, using the statements I'm going to read you right now as a way to start to shift your identity, your internal identity. Because I want you to remember, when you're going into the class to teach yoga, you're bringing the identity that you have associated yourself with into that class. So if you think, I'm really shy, I am a wallflower, I'm not worthy, who am I to be standing here? All literal things that I've heard from people. That comes with you. So, of course, it makes it harder to teach and feel confident because your identity is attached to these ways of being that are in conflict with how you think, how you see yourself from a desirable standpoint, from a desirable identity avatar. You see this other way you want to be as a teacher, but you have this limiting belief around your current identity. So I'm going to give you a little meditation that's focused on a list of identities that are empowered identities. Okay. So you can sort of tag this podcast episode and re-listen to this before you go in and teach your class. That would be a really helpful way to implement, to use this in real life. So first, I just want you to take a deep breath in and out. All right, so here we go. I am a good yoga teacher. I am a confident yoga teacher. I make an impact on the students in my classes. I'm willing to step into the arena and teach yoga because, hey, not everybody is. I am willing to be seen by others. I'm brave and courageous. I'm authentic. I'm doing important work. I'm helping people build better health. Take a deep breath in and out. Okay. So just notice how those phrases, how those mantras landed, and use those. Even if you just pick the one that resonated with you the most and you write it on a post-it note, use those. Put it in your car so it's the last thing you see before you go into the studio. Say it in your mind throughout your class as you're teaching. You know, that reference to being in the arena, that came up this past weekend at the Cleveland yoga teacher training I did, because I brought the Brené Brown book, Daring Greatly, where she uses that quote from Teddy Roosevelt all around daring greatly about being in the arena. The man or the woman who's in the arena is the one doing the work, and be damned to anybody else who's going to criticize them. And also be damned to that inner negative voice that we all have that's going to criticize the person, right? Like if I was saying it from my frame of reference, who's going to criticize me for not being a quote unquote perfect teacher or not feeling I'm in the arena. I'm doing the work. I'm showing bravery and courageousness by being willing to stand in front of people. So I want you to start giving yourself credit for what you are doing. This is again that zooming out. So I hope that you found this helpful. I'd love to know as you were listening, what made the biggest impact on you? What made the biggest impact on you that you heard today? And send me a message on Instagram and let me know. I will also include in the show notes a link to my programs and also a link to a download on how to be a confident teacher, 10 steps to confidence. So if you're feeling like that would be helpful, you can just grab it right in the show notes. You're probably listening on your phone, so just click the little podcast thing and you'll see how to get to the show notes and the link will be right there. I look forward to chatting with you next week, and thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. I'll talk to you next week on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening. If this episode got you thinking about a current challenge you're having in your classes or gave you ideas that connect to how you'd like to teach, I'd love to hear from you. I know a lot of teachers try to figure things out on their own by reading books, listening to podcast episodes, geez, even mine, or watching videos on social media. And while those things can be helpful, they don't actually solve the problem. What I've seen in my work with teachers is that problem solving and breakthroughs happen when you reach out for help and get one-on-one support, not in an hours-based program, not in a group training, but in a setting where what's going on with you is the focus. If this sounds like the kind of support that would make a difference for you, send me a message on Instagram at Barebones Yoga or email me at karen@barebonesyoga.com. Just include the word podcast and tell me what's on your mind, your biggest challenge right now, or something you want to do next but aren't sure how to get started. I'll reply back with a couple of specific things you can try, and if it makes sense, we can hop on a call as well. You don't have to figure it out on your own.